Fellow Guyanese, this evening I want to address a few issues. Uh, I wouldn't say issues, but a few topics that are important to our country and important to national life. One will be, and this is as a result of tremendous feedback from the public. I believe it is necessary for any functioning democracy to have not only an executive that adheres to the tenets of democracy and the rule of law, fairness, equity, and justice, but to have the other two arms of government, the judiciary and the legislature, also abiding by principles that would not only reinforce its independence, but would reinforce their commitment to the rule of law and to democracy. I am also of the firm belief that not only have all the electoral missions in Guyana found our elections in 2025 to be free and fair, but they were very complementary in the management of our elections. There are some issues that I wish to address, however, in this short discourse this evening. The third issue I want to further update the population on, because I've been consistently doing this, is how Guyana continues to be a global leader and a country whose public policy positions on the issue of cost of living has been highly regarded in the region and in the international community. It is important for us to understand these three issues. Now, one of the most recent observation report from our elections is the EU Election Observation Mission report, final report. Now, it is important in report writing for us to understand who is writing the reports and who is influencing the reports. And I believe that whilst all these reports point to the positive nature of the elections, I believe a time has come where we must get these missions, like the EU in this case, to adhere to international best practices in the hiring of local staff. If you go through some of the staff that were hired in this process by the EU, their own staff, that influenced the outcome of the report, you would have to question those persons' independence because they're associated with or are in association with persons who would have expressed partisan positions on many issues. The EU has always been an important part of elections observation in Guyana. And as president, I invited and welcomed European Union observation mission in Guyana. And when I received the EU final report sometime this afternoon, I went through the report to look at some of the comments and the challenges and everything that would have been raised in that report. It's important to note that the report points to the fact that the elections were peaceful, well run, and well run. That was how they described Election Day. Elections were peaceful, calm, and orderly. Voting, counting, and tabulation were administered efficiently and professionally. Polling staff performed well. So what are the important elements of the election? Before the elections, the preparation for the elections, how elections is managed on Elections Day, and the way in which the results are reported. So on Election Day, the mission basically said that the GCOM staff and mechanism was professional and efficient. The voting, counting, and tabulation, three of the most important components of a free and fair elections, were efficient and professional. That is to say, free from influence, free from bias, and demonstrated, those figures would have demonstrated the will of the people. Additionally, the report pointed out to the fact that women represented 87% of Elections Day staff and 81% of presiding officers. So we see the level of women participation in the electoral process on Elections Day as staff of GCOM. Secondly is the legal and procedural aspects of the election. The report points to improved transparency and improved legal and procedural reforms. The 2022 electoral reforms consolidated laws and introduced over 100 technical improvements. Notable were new transparent measures, which included real-time online publication of statement of polls, SOPs, immediately upon receipt by returning officers. Report further pointed to the fact that there were tighter recount procedures and increased penalties for electoral offenses, because these new amendments also brought great clarity to electoral offenses and the penalties that were associated with those offenses, that are associated with those offenses. The third aspect was the efficient election administration. How efficiently were the elections administered by GCOM Secretariat? Logistical operations were well executed. Regional staging areas, air, river, transport. Poll workers' training were assessed as comprehensive and professional. The voter information campaign improved with multimedia, hotline, and polling station search tool. So from a election efficiency point of view, that's the efficient administration of the elections by the Secretariat, again, pointed to marked improvement and efficiency. The inclusiveness of the candidate lists and the registration process, again, no challenge with that. This is pre-elections. Indigenous engagement, indigenous leaders were highlighted as contributing positively to the campaign. Observers and party agents were widely accredited, which means that there was wide accreditation. All political parties were accredited and present at polling stations. International and domestic observers deployed effectively. That's what the report says. Now, the report also points to deep political polarization and low trust in institutions. Now, the same report points to the fact of an election institution, GCOM, that has efficiently, effectively, and transparently conducted the 2025 polls. But as a result of the scar from 2020, the scar, the mistrust, the derailing of systems, the erosion of systems in the 2020 elections, there was mistrust from that era, from what took place by staff of GCOM in collusion with political parties. However, the report points to the marked improvement and efficiency and transparency of the 2025 polls. Now, the reports speak about uneven playing field and undue advantage by incumbency, which I find ridiculous, to say the least. First of all, this comment is not based on any facts. It is based primarily on complaints by political participants in the elections and their affiliates. We made it very clear that in any system, there are disadvantages to incumbency and advantages to incumbency. If an incoming government performed badly, did not fulfill its manifesto, then they are faced with a disadvantage of their poor performance. If they had to manage, like we did, in a period of COVID, in 2 national floods, in a period where the world had its highest food prices, highest transportation costs, in an environment in which active participation to buy votes by a political party, and by the way, this is a nationally recognized fact, and nowhere in the report did they mention this. So incumbency comes with positive and negative. But because of the performance of the People's Progressive Party civic government, we delivered on all our commitment. We had schools, we had hospitals, we had health centers, we had roads to be opened throughout the period, to be commissioned. That's not an incumbency advantage. That is a commitment that the government made in its manifesto of 2020 to 2025 that the incumbent would have delivered on. And the incumbent has a duty and responsibility like any other country in the European Union. In the European Union, governments campaign on their delivery. Government campaign on their results. And these hospitals, these schools, these roads, the subsidy to our rice farmers, they were all results of the People's Progressive Party civic government? Is the report saying that incumbency, as part of incumbency, must not include campaigning and celebrating the successes of the government? What nonsense is that? The government has a responsibility to highlight and celebrate its accomplishments and its results. Now, new or expanded social programs roll out near elections. How is that an uneven playing field? We always had a social agenda based on the budget. This report lacks analysis. Because if they went back to the 2025 budget and the 2024 budget and our manifesto, they will see that every single one of the social program was alluded to. That we made commitments that we kept and surpassed. And as president, I made it clear that as we surpass commitment and based on revenue projection, that we are going to give back more to the people. That is not an incumbency advantage. That is delivering. So the analytical aspect of this statement points to the inexperience and points to the fact that it has no basis in the reality. And then personalized calls to cash grant beneficiaries. It is a fact that persons receive calls from all political parties. Not only the incumbent, all political parties. This is not an incumbency problem. We have a responsibility to speak about our success. What kind of system will deny an incumbent to celebrate its success, speak about its success, to use its great management of the economy and added revenue to expand social programs? Those were our commitment. If you went back to our manifesto of 2020 and the budget, you would see that those are commitments that we made. So I just wanted to make that very clear. That I find that statement objectionable. Insufficient regulation of campaign finance. As we said, the process of enhancing the laws, the process of modernizing the laws for elections, and advancing these laws would form part of the constitutional reform that is ongoing. Long before the elections, when we met with the European Union, the head of the mission, I met with them. I made it very clear that whilst we have made advances, there's still a number of areas that must be addressed, and we are hoping that in the Constitutional Reform Commission and through their consultation process, that these laws would also evolve. Made it very clear. Nowhere in the report point to the fact that there is an ongoing constitutional reform process. Nowhere. Now, media bias. And every time when you look at the report only sought to identify media biases by state-owned and private media heavily favor the ruling party. We have statistics to show that there are many private media entities that were 80% negative against the People's Progressive Party Civic. Some 90% negative. So it is not favoring the ruling party. There's no stats that I can point to in the report. But we have had independent analysis throughout the campaign that showed us balance, negative and positive. But this report only sought to highlight the ruling party as being favored for positive comments. And let me be very clear. The People's Progressive Party Civic, we paid for our ads, we paid for all our political material. There is no mention about the misuse of social media by known political parties and operatives against the ruling party. The report skillfully avoided that. Voters list concern. We know the reports speak about mechanism to remove deceased persons. There is a mechanism. There is a mechanism to remove deceased persons from the list. But the report pointed to the fact that elections were free and fair, which would have meant that the only persons who voted were persons who were registered to vote. So the fact is that whilst you have a list of 757,000 plus persons, look at the numbers that actually voted. The report should have mentioned that the court would have already ruled on this list, the applicability of the list, how persons can be removed from the list. There is a court ruling on this. That should have been included as a note. That should have been included as an important note in this report. Now, I agree when the report said also that persons living with disability, 59% of polling stations lack independent access. That is something we have to work on. We have to work to ensure that we make it easier for persons living with disability to exercise their franchise. And part of the new building code is to ensure that all our public facilities are equipped to support persons living with disability. So I want to say that as a government, there is no other government in the history of this country that embraces democracy, that embraces the rule of law, that embraces free and fair election like the People's Progressive Party Civic. And we welcome every suggestion. As I have said, the Constitutional Reform commission and this period would help us to further update our laws. And this was said to the European Union. We embrace the fact that this is evolving. We embrace the fact on people living with disability. But I've highlighted some areas in the report that are subjective, partisan, and completely biased, and cannot, by the lowest benchmark, be viewed as fair and balanced. So I wanted to once again thank the EU Election Observation Mission for their work, to thank them for being part of our elections, and to let the EU know that the People's Progressive Party civic government will always value their participation, but that, like any entity, they too must reevaluate based on some of the facts that I've highlighted. They must reevaluate where some narrative comes from, so that they can improve in presenting the facts and in presenting the completeness of its report. We look forward to continuing our work with the European Union and the Electoral Observation Commission as we work towards building stronger and more resilient electoral system here in Guyana, as we want to see all across the world. The other issue I wish to address is one that can seriously harm the work of the Guyana Revenue Authority and the Guyana Revenue Authority ability to collect taxes. It's a ruling that was so flawed that it exposes our taxation system to criminality and fraud. For a matter of fact, the ruling of Gino Prasad is viewed by many professionals as one that can incentivize the falsification of documents. There is something that is called post-clearance. There is something in post-clearance that inherently deals with the verification of values and the ability of the Revenue Authority after verification to apply the right taxes. However, I am pleased and the government welcomes the recent and highly consequential decision delivered on the 17th of November 2025 by Madam Justice Roxanne George in the matter of Janjen Yu and Guyana Revenue Authority. Justice George's ruling brings clarity to an area of significant public importance. The authority of the Guyana Revenue Authority to conduct post-clearance assessments of imported consignments. Her judgment is compelling, meticulously reasoned, intellectually rigorous, and firmly rooted. Indeed, it is upholding the rule of law. In both statutory interpretation and the practical necessities of modern customs administration. It stands as an exemplar of judicious thoroughness, demonstrating a deep understanding of the customs framework, the evolution of trade facilitation practices, and the responsibilities of a revenue authority charged with safeguarding the state's fiscal interests. Post-clearance audits and assessments are by no means novel. For decades, these mechanisms have been integral to the customs architecture. Historically, such functions were executed through the Inspections Department of the former Customs and Excise Department, now subsumed within the GRA. As international trade has expanded and as the global community has moved decisively towards streamlined custom clearance, custom administrations worldwide has strengthened post-clearance controls. The GRA has acted in step with global norms, enhancing its capacity to verify the accuracy of declaration after goods have passed the port of entry, an approach endorsed by the World Customs Organization and now authoritatively affirmed by Justice George's decision. Her ruling brings coherence to the law and protects the revenue of our country. This welcome clarity stands in stark contrast to the earlier ruling by Justice Gino Prasad, a decision that has confounded many observers and which the Guyana Revenue Authority regards as fundamentally flawed in law. That ruling, now slated for appeal by the GRA, has been widely criticized as perverse, internally inconsistent, and disconnected from both established custom practice and the evident intention of the Custom Act 8201. Many Guyanese remain baffled by how such a conclusion could have been drawn, especially in circumstances where the GRA had contended that the importation under scrutiny involved falsified declarations relating to a luxury motor vehicle. If Justice Prasad's decision is permitted to stand, its implications will be profoundly damaging. It would effectively erect a judicial barrier, preventing the GRA from recovering taxes rightfully owed to the state once goods had been cleared. No matter how regardless of how falsified, regardless of the level of falsification, regardless of what falsification is discovered thereafter, his ruling would bar the state from its rightful revenue. Such an outcome is wholly inconceivable in a lawful and orderly revenue system. It would render the customs administration toothless, incentivize dishonest declarations, and deprive the state of significant revenue. Justice George's ruling restores rationality to the law. It reaffirms that post-clearance assessments are not only lawful, but essential to protect the public purse. The government welcomes our clear, authoritative, and well-grounded judgment, which reestablishes coherence in customs jurisprudence and ensures that the GRA can continue fulfilling its mandate without artificially or without artificial or ill-conceived constraints. The post-clearance mechanism is a mechanism for the ease of trade, the ease of doing business. But it comes with a system of verification. And in this case, the evidence is glaring and clear that documents were falsified. So I want to register in the strongest possible way that the government of Guyana is extremely happy that the ruling of the Chancellor has avoided catastrophic repercussions by what Gino Passar tried to do. Her ruling reinforces the rule of law. And to the thousands of Guyanese that are baffled, you must be happy with the ruling of the Chancellor on this matter. And importers are also baffled. Legitimate businessmen are baffled because those who enjoy post-clearance stand to lose it. If the state, if a judge is saying the state cannot apply its means of verification, so trade will not be facilitated. Just imagine if all the containers will stay there until verification is completed. So it was very important for commerce, for trade, for the international rule of law, for international best practices, that such a ruling by the Chancellor be made. The third issue I want to address is one in context of what is happening globally and in our region, and that is the global cost of living crisis, as some has described it. The causes, the consequences, and the policy responses by my government. Rising cost of living has emerged as the most pressing global issue that governments around the world are faced with. The current crisis may be attributed to the supply chain disruptions caused by COVID, pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, the Iran-Israel war, the Israel-Palestinian war, and all the other conflicts around the world. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many production areas, many factories have not yet entered back production or are back at their full scale of production. So we are nowhere close to optimizing the production to supply the global market. We have not had a reduction in transportation costs. For a matter of fact, we have a situation now in the region where not only do we have increased transportation costs, but we have reduced efficiency in the movement of cargo within the region. The fiscal and monetary measures implemented by governments worldwide to alleviate the fallouts of COVID-19 included stimulus packages, interest rate cuts, direct financial support to individuals and businesses, and this, in many cases, have significantly affected global cost of living. While these measures were intended to safeguard the well-being of citizens, in many instances, they are linked to inflationary pressures in the global system. The rising costs of energy, labor, transportation, along with other inputs, are also contributing globally to increase in costs. It is evident from all available data and research that no country has been spared from the cost of living impact from COVID-19 and all of these wars that the world is faced with. According to recent global finance, inflation spiked in 179 countries out of 194. Developed countries such as the US, United Kingdom, recorded some of their highest inflation rates in 40 years in 2022. In the same year, inflation rate in Canada was the highest since 1983. Meanwhile, the inflation rates of the largest economy in Latin America reached a 15-year high during periods in the last 3 years. The European Union also recorded the highest inflation rate in 4 decades during 2023. If you look at food inflation, international food prices measured by the FAO Global Food Price Index rose sharply in 2021 and 2022, while the FAO Global Food Price Index has trended slightly downwards between December 2023 and February 2024. It has increased continuously since February 2024. So according to the Global Food Price Index, between December 2023 and February 2024, there was some indication of slight reduction. However, since February 2024, globally, there has been sustained increases above pre-pandemic level. The global fuel prices, as measured by the WTI crude oil price, also accelerated since 2021. In the European Union, food price inflation increased from the last quarter of 2021 to reach 3.5%, and by May 2022, it was 7.5%. And those trends continue. The same can be said about retail electricity worldwide. The same can be said not only in the developing world, but also the developed world. Take, for example, food inflation in the UK, which has moderated over the past year. A recent survey revealed that 44% of adults in that country purchase less food due to the high cost of living. In our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, food price inflation grew steadily from January 2022. And that describes the international and regional ecosystem we are part of. However, when you look at Guyana compared to other countries in the region, Guyana inflation rate was lower, food inflation rate. For example, if you look at food inflation, according to the report, in 2021, it was 11.6% in Guyana. In 2023, it was 3.8%. So in Latin America and the Caribbean, food and energy were the main contributors to inflation. Food and energy. Apart from these factors, empirical studies confirm that the high inflation in our region was driven by demand-side pressures stemming from expansionary policies, supply chain disruptions, and currency depreciation. Now let us proceed to look at some of the interventions that we as a country, we have made, and try to have an understanding at those interventions that we have made. Now, when one examines the major factors of food price or cost of living and look in the region, you would see that it was related to energy costs, rising food prices, transportation costs, that is the goods coming in, imported inflation, and I want to demonstrate to you, and of course, vulnerable groups from COVID-19 coming forward, how Guyana has implemented a series of measures to address these. To begin with, Guyana inflation was contained at low single digits due to a combination of monetary and fiscal measures. To contain food inflation, the government removed VAT on fertilizer, agrochemicals, pesticide, and every key input in our food production system. Go back to the 2021 budget. The government restored the zero-rated status to all food items and other basic household necessities, such as wheaten flour, basic breads, oats, unflavored cracker biscuits, cooking oil, etc. Since the government assumed office in our first term, you'll remember we reversed more than 220% increase in our D&I charges. We reversed a 600% increase in land rental. This gave back to our farmers $1.4 billion annually. We removed the VAT on machinery and equipment for farmers, for our mining sectors. We invested in building out our food production system, enhance our production of local food, including poultry, including some of the imported crops, and also expanding egg production. We removed corporate income tax on interest earned by commercial banks on loans provided to the poultry sector. We implemented a series of monetary policies to make lending easier, to make lending less costly, to reduce the interest rate, and also to remove burden from those in the productive sector. We have also expanded many areas of production with government support in infrastructure. We have also been able in 2023 and years prior to that to provide grants. You would recall the government provided a grant of $150,000 to each of our fisher folk. This year alone, this year again, we have given our fisher folks grants. In the past 3 years, we have improved all of the facilities. We have removed taxes and given more incentives to every aspect of our productive sector. Now, as I have said, global food inflation, global cost of living was driven by the cost of fuel, cost of energy, imported inflation, food prices, transportation. So I want to examine some of the policies that we pursued to cushion this impact. You would recall, to stave off the inflation pressure from imported fuel and relieve citizens of the burden of higher fuel prices at the pump, the government adjusted the excise tax on gasoline and diesel. We have adjusted this to 0%. The net effect of this is that we have saved consumers hundreds of billions of dollars that they would have had to spend. So we avoided the increase in the cost for gasoline and diesel. We avoided the transfer of that burden to the population, saving consumers hundreds of billions of dollars. You will recall also that to deal with the freight costs from 2020, 3 months after assuming the office then, we had a 75% increase in freight costs. To minimize the impact on imported items, especially food products, the government rolled back freight costs to the pre-pandemic level. This initiative, to date, we have not readjusted this. We have continued this initiative. And at the end of 2024 alone, almost $30 billion of savings. $30 billion of savings, that is cost that would have been transferred to the consumer. The government absorbed. You look at other measures where we assisted citizens who occupy their own dwelling, financed by mortgage. The government negotiated lower interest rates on mortgage for homeowners, waiver the taxes on building material, and increase mortgage limit to $30 million. This would have benefited tens of thousands of Guyanese. Almost $5 billion directly transferred back to Guyanese. When you look at the Guyana Water Inc., what did we do? We proactively implemented measures that not only ensure you did not have an increase in water rate, but we are the only country to reduce water rate. But to do this, the government transferred billions of dollars to GWI on behalf of every consumer. We transferred tens of billions of dollars on behalf of every consumer to cushion the costs so that you don't have any increases. The government absorbed those increases, because 60% of the operational costs of GWI is power, electricity. Outside of that, you would recall that we restored the electricity and water subsidy. Billions of dollars. We transferred again to the elderly, the pensioners. We removed VAT on electricity, water, and medical supplies. In the last 5 years, that's tens of billions of dollars of savings to the consumer. We also implemented a variety of measures to boost income to citizens. The reintroduction of the 1-month tax-free bonus, tens of billions of dollars. The Because We Care grant tens of billions of dollars. The old age and public assistance increased old age by more than 75%, public assistance by more than 110%, placing tens of billions of dollars to our pensioners and the elderly. We increased the minimum pension and invalidity pension of the NIS, placing more than $3 billion in the hands of beneficiaries. The payout of a one-off bonus to healthcare professionals, employment of part-time workers across the country, billions of dollars of disposable income into ordinary people's pocket. We have consistently increased the wages and salaries of public servants, more than $100 billion, rehired sugar workers. These are things that your government would have done. When you compare this to the last government, the APNU AFC government, that imposed VAT on electricity, water, medical supplies, fertilizer, agrochemical, pesticides, key input, punitive taxes and license fees, that took hundreds of billions of dollars out of the pockets of ordinary people. That is what those measures did. We put money in the pockets of people. This government has been utilizing every monetary and fiscal tool at its disposal to address cost of living at home. I am happy to report that the measures we have implemented have produced positive policy dividends. Last year, the end of period inflation rate of Guyana was 2%, compared with the global average of 6.2%. Various credible international institutions have also recognized the progress we have made in tackling the cost of living, including the Inter-American Development Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Indeed, the IDB and IMF attributed the low inflation rate to the measures implemented by the government. As we speak, the government is also rolling out initiatives to strengthen our food production system. We're establishing a regional food hub, getting the energy plant completed to bring down your cost of electricity by half, the free university education, free textbook in the schools, expanding our school feeding program. We are now finalizing efforts that will bring more grants to vulnerable groups. We have already announced some for our fisher folk. And a series of initiatives will be announced. A series of initiatives will be announced to further support our population, to further enhance the disposable income of our population, to further support vulnerable groups, including people living with disability. Special initiative to reduce the costs on parents by incentivizing child care, homes for the elderly, incentivizing these facilities. Special initiative that would see access to capital, greater access to capital for SMEs, the reduction of interest rates for SMEs, greater incentives for the production sector, the productive sector. It's not only about grants that will come. With the NGL facility coming on board, the reduction in your cost for cooking gas, specific initiative and incentive to boost home ownership, specific initiative to incentivize expansion of businesses, value creation and value added. All of these measures that we will be pursuing in the coming weeks and months will further enhance our ability at the national level and at the household level to continue to tackle the issue of cost of living. But I am pleased to say that Guyana is one of the leading examples of a country that has implemented a series of measures that are internationally recognized now as best practices in dealing with the cost of living challenge. Thank you very much for sharing your time with me this evening. And as time goes by, we'll be addressing other topical issues and also addressing the plans as we embrace the future, stronger and more prosperous for every Guyanese.